this book is awesome. It's I didn't think I'd like Herbert Hoover as much as I did, and he's one of those presidents that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about because we're taught that his only story was I think 5 months into his presidency, the Depression hits. He didn't really do much, and that's his presidency. And I don't. And obviously, you have a completely different take because there's no way what I just said would fill 500 pages. But why did you decide to write about Herbert Hoover?
Well, it took me some convincing to write about Hoover. I started out exactly where you started out. Why would anyone want to write about a failed president and one that had a reputation as not a particularly interesting character? So I resisted that. What I actually wanted to do is, after I'd written about Hearst, all of which that book all took place in the late 19th century. And I enjoyed that period of time so much, I thought I'd just move up another 25 years or so and do something in the early 20th century and just keep learning my way through the 20th century. That was kind of the plan. And I read a lot about World War I. And Hoover kept popping up in the literature of World War I because he was in London at the time. He was a mining engineer based in London, and he'd helped feed the Belgians after they were occupied by the Germans during World War I, helped feed a nation of 8 million people for the duration of the war, and is generally credited with having saved 8 million people from starvation. And then he was with Wilson at the peace talks in 1919 at the end of the war. And again, he was popping up everywhere. People were saying, if you want to get anything done in Europe now that the war's over and the island or the continent's all been blown to shit after 5-6 years of fighting. If you want to get anything done, go to Hoover. He's the only one who can accomplish anything at this time. And he was viewed as this incredibly competent and trustworthy and reliable individual who had almost superhuman powers when it came to getting anything done. And just the fact that he had personally started the Belgian relief and carried out the Belgian relief, and then again saved millions more lives in the months after the war by distributing food and other necessaries. I thought that was just a great thing to have done, regardless of his political career. So I wanted to write about Hoover's war and just tell that story, and then at the end of the book have him go off into politics to ruin his life. But I couldn't sell that story. Nobody would publish it. They all kept saying, you got to do the whole biography, you got to do the whole life. There hasn't been a good life of Hoover, and people prefer biographies, sort of cradle to grave stories about American presidents rather than these smaller vignettes of their life. So I went back and started reading more about Hoover, learned more about his upbringing, the fact that he was born really on the frontier to a Quaker family. He was orphaned by the age of 8 or 9, passed around his family, had a really rough upbringing that he hid in later years, but had a really rough time as an adolescent. Was first student ever to arrive at Stanford University in its inaugural year. had an amazing career as a mining engineer. He was your age, and he was running gold mines in Australia. And a few more years, he was running China's coal mines and digging for gold there as well. He was there during the Boxer Rebellion, given up for dead, managed to escape, go back to London, where he made a fortune, and was really worth a huge amount of money before the First World War, lost a lot when the war outbroke, but didn't really care and gave himself over to humanitarian work anyway. Then he starts his political career, and the more I looked into that, the more substantive he seemed to me. He was a really accomplished commerce secretary for Harding and Coolidge in the 1920s, and pretty much anything of interest that happened in those administrations during the 1920s was accomplished by Hoover, generally with the support, but not always with the support of his presidents. And then we got to the Hoover's own administration between 28 and 32. And of course, as you say, the Depression starts really 5 months into his term, and he didn't get a chance to do any of the things that he wanted to do. He had a very progressive-minded Republican and had a lot of social reforms that he wanted to bring in, but never had the chance because he was dealing with an economic calamity almost from the get-go. And the more I looked at that, the more I saw that the record on it was didn't do him justice, that he had fought far more diligently and imaginatively against the Depression than he was given credit for. Some historians have recognized just everything he tried to do, and the fact that a lot of the New Deal was actually based on things that Hoover had tried while he was or was setting up while he was president. But he came much closer than people would suspect to actually righting the ship in the Depression. Failed ultimately to stop it in its tracks, but again, did much better than people would think. His biggest failure was as a politician. He didn't take politics seriously, wasn't a great communicator, didn't think enough about how to engage his audience, his base. He was more concerned with actually getting the job done and trying to fix the problems of America, and he let a lot of his political duties slide. And of course, he comes up against Franklin Roosevelt in 1932, who was probably the most gifted politician that America had ever had. And Roosevelt made mincemeat of Hoover during the election of 32. But then Hoover comes back and founds the opposition to New Deal democratic politics, and was really the founder of the new Republican Party, which was he would have identified as a party in opposition to New Deal politics. And for 30 years, he was very influential in that. So you got a guy who starts out as an orphan in on the Iowa frontier, and he ends his life at the age of 90, still all together there, and still fishing he was a very serious fisherman up to a year or two before he died. And he lived his last days in the Waldorf Towers in New York, with the Duke of Windsor and Cole Porter as neighbors. Just the, the arc of that life to me was incredible. The more I looked at it, you could tell really the whole story of the first half of the 20th century through Hoover. Sometimes he was the hero, sometimes he was an opponent of the heroes, but he was always in the mix. He always had something to say. He always represented some important part of the American public. And he was, at a personal level, I don't think he was actually, I don't know that I found him likable, but I found him fascinating and admirable in that he always, especially when he went into public life, he was determined to do good and to be as honest as he could. And he ran a very clean administration. And he was a principled politician. He rarely stooped to low blows and negative attacks on his opponents. Generally took the high road, and on the whole, I think, was a really admirable public servant.